Have you ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still ending up in the same place? You wake up with good intentions. You want to focus. You want to move. You want to grow. But somewhere between the thought and the action, something blocks you, and you can't explain it. That's not laziness. That's not weakness. That's your mind working against you. In this video, you're going to discover how your mind becomes your prison when left on autopilot, and how to turn it into a tool that actually builds the life you want. You'll learn how to recognize mental traps before they take over. You'll understand the loops your brain keeps repeating, not because they're helpful, but because they're familiar. And more importantly, you'll walk away with a new way to use your thoughts, not to escape life, but to lead it. And in the final 2 minutes of this video, I'll give you a sentence, just one, that will help you interrupt any self-sabotaging thought the moment it appears. Use it once, and you'll feel the difference. Repeat it daily, and you'll rewire who you are becoming. But first, you need to understand something that most people never realize. Your mind isn't neutral. It doesn't just think. It builds. It builds your interpretation. It builds your emotions. It builds your identity. And if you're not in charge of what it's building a cage. A cage made of overthinking, of what-ifs, of memories that you keep replaying, of doubts that sound like logic, of fears that dress up as caution, of internal stories that feel like truth, but were built out of repetition, not reality. And here's the dangerous part. You don't even know it's happening, because it doesn't hurt. It just delays. It distracts. It keeps you overanalyzing, overplanning, overthinking, and underacting. That's the real trap. A mind that's busy, but going nowhere. That's how you end up exhausted, but unfulfilled. Always processing, never progressing. Always preparing, never planting. Always thinking, never building. Stephen Covey said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." But what happens when your mind reacts before you even realize the stimulus? What happens when the space shrinks and your thoughts take over so fast that you no longer choose? You stop leading your mind, and it starts leading you back into the same loops, same emotions, same regrets. That ends now. This is not a mindset video. It's not about thinking positive. It's about reclaiming your position as the leader of your own system. Because your mind is a system, and every thought you allow, every belief you accept, every word you repeat, it's either sharpening that system or sabotaging it. So in this video, we're going to open that system up, expose what's happening behind the scenes, and then show you how to rebuild it from the inside out. This isn't about controlling your thoughts. It's about using them with intention. Because when you do, your mind becomes your greatest ally. And when you don't, it becomes your cage. Take a breath. Let's begin. You wake up and think you're starting fresh. New day, new energy, new mindset. But within 5 minutes, your brain is already playing the same song. What if I mess up again? I need to be more consistent. Why do I always feel behind? And just like that, before the day even begins, you're not leading your life. You're following your thoughts. But they're not new thoughts. They're loops, old recordings, mental habits that feel like truth because they've been repeated so many times you stopped questioning them. And here's the brutal part. You think you're thinking, but you're just recycling. You're not actually making conscious choices. You're running a mental program that's been installed slowly over years, by fear, by doubt, by repetition. And when that happens, you start mistaking motion for direction. You read more books. You plan more goals. You talk about what's next. But underneath it all, your brain is looping the same identity. I'm not ready yet. I always mess this up eventually. I need to feel more prepared before I act. And that's not leadership. That's paralysis disguised as logic. Stephen Covey taught that the first habit of highly effective people is being proactive. But you can't be proactive if your thinking is reactive. You can't lead your mind forward if every thought is pulling you back into who you used to be. So let's expose what's really happening here. Your brain isn't trying to sabotage you. It's trying to protect you. It loops because loops feel safe, predictable, familiar. And the brain would rather stay in a known pattern of failure than risk the unknown of success. Why? Because failure you've lived through feels less dangerous than success you can't yet imagine. So what does your brain do? It builds stories to justify staying where you are. It says, now's not the time. Let's get more clarity first. You're making progress, just not ready yet. But here's the signal. If your thoughts keep pointing in circles, you're not processing. You're delaying. You're giving power to a mental loop that's robbing you of momentum, clarity, and identity. So how do you break it? First, you notice it. You start listening to your thoughts like you'd listen to a friend. And when that voice says something familiar, something that sounds like old you stop and ask, is this thought leading me somewhere, or just keeping me spinning? That single question has the power to interrupt decades of unconscious repetition. Second, you replace the loop with a line. A line has direction. A loop repeats. You don't need perfect clarity about the future. You just need to take one step that your old self would hesitate to take. That's how you draw the line forward. That's how you start becoming someone else, by doing something else. And third, you stop negotiating with your loops. You don't argue with the old voice. You don't ask for its permission. You say, I've heard this before. I'm not listening again. And then you act. Because loops die when you stop responding to them. They live when you keep feeding them attention. And some of them are clever. Some loops sound like responsibility. I can't move forward until I fix everything perfectly. Some sound like kindness. Be gentle with yourself. Maybe this just isn't your time. Some sound like strategy. Let's wait until the conditions are better. But if the outcome is the same, no movement, no decision, no change, it doesn't matter how smart the loop sounds. It's still a trap. So here's what I want you to remember. You're not your thoughts. You're what you reinforce. And every time you obey the loop, you strengthen it. Every time you act in spite of it, you break it. You won't feel different at first. You won't be sure if it's working. But that's because your mind is still adjusting to not being in control. You're reclaiming the steering wheel. And the old programming will panic. It will throw everything it has to get your attention again. Let it scream. Let it spin. You don't owe it a response. You owe yourself forward motion. So next time the thought shows up, whatever version of, you're not ready. This probably won't work. Or, let's wait just a little longer. You hear, smile, breathe, and whisper back, you're just a loop. And I'm not following anymore. That moment, that's leadership. That's identity in motion. That's you, becoming different, thought by thought. Now tell me in the comments, what's one loop you're done following? Name it. Cut the cord. You think you're leading. But today, you actually are. You say you want growth. But your brain doesn't care about that. Growth is uncomfortable. It's unpredictable. It requires risk, exposure, effort, and long periods of not knowing if it will work. And your brain is not designed for any of that. It's not trying to make you better. It's trying to keep you alive. It doesn't prioritize fulfillment. It prioritizes survival. And survival means one thing. Avoid pain. Stay safe. Repeat what feels familiar. So when you start moving towards something new, a habit, a business, a boundary, a shift in identity, your brain doesn't get excited. It gets nervous. Because unfamiliar equals unsafe. And unsafe equals threat. And here's where the trap begins. Your brain starts building a case for why you should slow down, why you should stop, why you should stay close to what you've always known. Even if that version of your life is making you miserable, it tells you, let's not push too hard. You've tried before. Remember how that went. You're just tired right now. Rest a little longer. Sounds kind. Sounds reasonable. But let's be honest. It's not compassion. It's protection, disguised as logic. And if you don't recognize it, you'll keep calling it your truth. You'll say, this is just who I am. This is my pace. This is what works for me. But deep down, you'll feel it. You're not free. You're just safe. And safety, without movement, becomes a prison. Stephen Covey taught that we have the power to choose our response, to live by principle, not by programming. But if you let your brain dictate every decision, you're not choosing. You're reacting. You're obeying a nervous system that's been trained to fear progress. Because yes, your brain wants you alive, but it doesn't care if you're thriving. And most people never question that. They mistake their mental resistance for truth. They confuse stress with a sign to stop. They think fear is evidence that something's wrong. But in growth, Fear is often a sign you're finally moving into something real. So let's shift. What if discomfort wasn't the enemy? What if the real enemy was your addiction to comfort? Because that's what your brain loves most. Comfort, predictability, familiarity. It would rather repeat a cycle that's slowly destroying your confidence than risk a bold move that might rebuild it. And that's why growth hurts. Not because it's wrong, but because your brain is wired to resist it. Here's how you break that. You stop asking your brain how it feels, and you start telling it where you're going. You wake up and say, I'm not here to survive today. I'm here to build something that lasts. You act before the fear kicks in. You take the step before your thoughts convince you not to. You breathe through the resistance and move anyway. That's how you rewire it. Because your brain learns through repetition. And every time you act in the face of discomfort, you're sending it a new message. This is safe too. This is who I am now. This is what we do. And slowly, your baseline changes. You no longer panic at the first sign of uncertainty. You don't run when it gets hard. You don't wait for the fear to disappear. You walk straight through it. Not because you're fearless, but because you're focused. You've stopped asking your brain to approve your growth, and you've started teaching it to trust your decisions. Let's go deeper. Growth isn't just about action. It's about replacing your emotional compass. The old compass said, is this comfortable? Then I'll do it. Is this familiar? Then I'll stay. The new compass says, is this aligned? Then I'll move. Is this necessary? Then I'll build. You'll still feel fear, still feel doubt, still feel resistance. But now, those emotions don't mean stop. They mean stretch. They mean new territory. They mean transformation is close. So here's what I want you to do. Next time your brain starts building a case against your growth, pause. Don't debate it. Don't overanalyze it. Just say, I hear you, but we're doing it anyway. Say it like a leader. Say it like someone who's done waiting for the mind to feel ready. Because if you only move when it's comfortable, you'll never move far. Now I want to hear from you. What's one area of your life where you've been mistaking comfort for truth? Drop it in the comments. Let's make it visible so you can finally take your power back. Not every thought you think is true, and not every thought you think is yours. Some were given to you. Some were built from fear. Some were trained through repetition. But none of them are identity, unless you agree to keep them. That's the difference between those who grow and those who stay stuck. Not who has better thoughts, but who makes better decisions about which thoughts deserve power. Your brain is constantly generating input, like a news feed, like static, like background noise on a radio station. Most of it is not useful. Most of it is old. Most of it is designed to reinforce whatever identity you've rehearsed the most. And that's the trap. Because the more a thought shows up, the more real it feels. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. You think, I'm not consistent. And your brain lights up. Yes, we've thought this before. Let's bring in some proof. And it does. It pulls up memories of when you quit early, skipped workouts, procrastinated. Not because that's your truth, but because that's the identity you've been rehearsing. Your thoughts are just inputs. They're suggestions. They're raw materials. But you are the builder. You decide what becomes structure. You decide what becomes repeated. And what gets replaced. Stephen Covey said, we are not our feelings. We are not our moods. We are not even our thoughts. We are the force that chooses how to respond. So if you keep identifying with every thought, you're not leading. You're reacting. You're becoming whatever your brain happens to serve that day. And most days, your brain will serve what's easy, what's known, and what's been reinforced the longest. That's why change feels so disorienting. Because the moment you try to insert a new thought, like, I'm disciplined now, I'm becoming the kind of person who follows through, I lead my mind, not the other way around. The brain goes, nope, that's not us. It rejects the input, not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't match the current identity. And unless you push that thought again and again and again, it won't stick. But if you do, if you keep repeating it with intention, action, and reinforcement, your brain eventually adapts. Not all at once, but it shifts. The new thought becomes easier to think, easier to say, easier to act on. That's how you reprogram identity. Not by waiting for the old thoughts to leave, but by choosing every day which ones you let in. So let me ask you, what thoughts do you default to when you're tired? when you're alone, when you're not being watched. That's the real test. Because anyone can think clearly when they're inspired. Anyone can believe in growth after a motivational video. But what do you say to yourself at 6 a.m. when no one's watching? What do you think when something doesn't go your way? That's where the real construction happens. And that's where you must become a gatekeeper. Your mind will offer. You're failing again. It's probably not going to work. You're just not cut out for this. That's input. You reply, noted, rejected. I'm building something else. It's not about fighting the thought. It's about overriding it with better instruction. Because your subconscious doesn't speak emotion. It speaks consistency. So if you consistently give it new language, new evidence, new behavior, it adjusts. That's what identity is. The product of what you've chosen to reinforce, not what you felt in the moment. Let's make it practical. Start catching your thoughts in real time. Don't just think. Observe. When a thought hits, pause and ask, is this thought useful? Does this thought align with who I'm becoming? Have I heard this one before? And where did it ever take me? If it's useless, you don't follow it. If it's misaligned, you rewrite it. If it's a loop, you exit. Say it out loud. This is just a thought. It only becomes me if I choose it. That's the power most people never claim. Because they've been trained to believe that what they think is what they are. But it's not. You are what you practice. You are what you reinforce. You are what you decide to keep, and what you have the courage to release. Now, I want you to go even deeper. What's one thought that's been looping in your mind that you now realize is just an old input? Name it, expose it, then replace it out loud. Drop it in the comments below, and write the one sentence that you're choosing instead. Say it today, say it tomorrow, say it until it becomes real. Because your thoughts are just inputs, but your identity is your decision. Thinking feels productive. You sit in silence, go over your plans, consider all your options. You tell yourself you're just getting clear, that you're being intentional. But days pass, weeks pass, and nothing changes. Why? Because you're not leading. You're just thinking. And thinking, without action, isn't clarity. It's delay. Let's be clear. There's a difference between strategy and spiraling. Strategy leads to movement. Spiraling leads to exhaustion. You can spend an entire year thinking about change and still wake up stuck in the same pattern. Because the more you think, without moving, the more pressure you build. And the more pressure you build, the more impossible it feels to begin. Stephen Covey said, "To know and not to do is really not to know." In other words, until you act, you haven't learned anything. You haven't shifted anything. You haven't led anything. You're just circling, mentally active, physically frozen. And here's the silent danger of thinking. The brain rewards you for it. You get little hits of satisfaction for planning. You feel a sense of control. You trick yourself into believing that you're doing something, when really, you're just building a more complex version of the same cage. You're overcomplicating to avoid commitment. You're analyzing to avoid risk. You're preparing to avoid responsibility. That's not leadership. That's fear, dressed in a smarter outfit. And it's costing you everything. Every goal you've set, every habit you want to build, every new identity you say you want to step into. It's all on the other side of action, not analysis. Because thinking doesn't build self-respect. Action does. Following through does. Showing up when it's inconvenient does. That's what builds trust with yourself. And self-trust is the foundation of all real transformation. So here's the shift. Stop asking yourself what you should do. Start asking yourself, what will I do now? Because that's where momentum begins. One action, one clear step, taken not because you feel ready, but because you've decided you're done waiting. Done waiting for perfect timing. Done waiting for perfect clarity. Done waiting to feel like the version of you who already has it all figured out. That version is built through action, not through more thinking. Let's go deeper. The reason you keep thinking is because your brain is trying to avoid discomfort. It says, let's just get more data. Let's make sure we really understand everything before we move. Let's make the perfect plan. But clarity doesn't come before movement. Clarity comes from engagement. You learn more in one step forward than in 10 days of overthinking. When you move, the world responds. Your body wakes up. Your mind sharpens. Your identity shifts. Because you've moved from theory to leadership, from passive to present, from from thought to choice. That's when your brain starts following you, not the other way around. So let me ask you, how many times have you told yourself you were almost ready? How many times have you said, "Tomorrow, I'll start for real"? And where did it take you? Thinking will never deliver what only action can build. And the more you think, the more fragile you become. Because you start to believe that only perfect conditions justify movement. But here's the truth. Leaders don't move because it's perfect. They move because it's time. And it is time. You already know what you need to do. You've known. The thought is clear. The emotion is real. But the transformation won't begin until your body moves. So here's your challenge. Take the step now. Send the message. Create the system. Make the decision. Shut down the excuse. Do the thing you've been thinking about for weeks. Even if it's imperfect. Even if it's small. Even if your brain says, "We're not ready." That voice isn't your truth. It's just your delay. And every time you move anyway, you shrink that voice. You weaken its grip. You reinforce. I'm not just someone who thinks. I'm someone who leads. And if you're serious about that, drop it in the comments. What's one thing you've been overthinking? And what action are you taking today to break the loop? Don't just type it. Do it. And when you're done, say it out loud. Thinking delays me. Action defines me. That's the standard now. That's your identity now. And that's how we keep building forward. You think you're stuck because of a lack of motivation, or clarity, or time. But that's not it. You're stuck because of repetition. Because your brain is an echo chamber. And it keeps feeding you back the same thoughts, feelings, and behaviors you've rehearsed for years. And whether you realize it or not, that repetition has become your reality. Stephen Covey taught, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. That entire chain begins with repetition. Your mind doesn't believe what's true. It believes what's repeated. And every time you say, "I'm not good at this. I never follow through. I always fall off eventually," you're not just expressing a thought. You're hardwiring a belief. You're locking in an identity. That's how reality is built. Not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of small, consistent repetitions that your brain learns to call normal. So the question isn't, why am I stuck? The real question is, what have I been rehearsing? Because if you rehearse weakness, even unconsciously, you will live weak. If you rehearse doubt, your confidence will always feel temporary. If you rehearse survival mode, success will feel unnatural. Not because you're broken, but because repetition is indifferent. It doesn't care what you're repeating. It will build anything you feed it, truth or lie, strength or fear, discipline or chaos. And that's the danger. Most people don't even know what they've been rehearsing. They say they want change, but their inner dialogue is the same. Their behavior loops are the same. Their responses to triggers are the same. And then they wonder why nothing's different. Because nothing will be different until your inputs change. Not for one day, not for 1 week, but again, and again, and again. That's how the old reality crumbles, and the new one gets built. Repetition is how you became who you are, and it's how you'll become who you're meant to be. But you don't just repeat anything. You repeat what you make easy. And that's why change feels hard. Because the old self has systems. You've practiced it. You've automated it. You've made it easy to slip back into. The new self? It's still in manual mode. It's still unfamiliar. So every repetition feels awkward, even fake. But fake isn't the problem. Lack of repetition is. Repetition is what moves a thought from resistance to recognition, and from recognition to reflex. Think of it like carving a path through a forest. The first time it's rough. You're cutting through brush. It feels inefficient. But walk it every day. Soon, the trail forms. Soon, your body remembers. Soon, it becomes the way. That's your mind. So the goal isn't to get it perfect. The goal is to get it ingrained. Which means you don't just think the new thought once. You don't just act like the new self for one day. You do it so often that your brain says, this again. This must be who we are now. That's the shift. You don't build a new identity through inspiration. You build it through intentional, repeated evidence. And yes, there will be days you slip, days you hesitate, days when the old patterns scream louder than the new ones. That's not failure. That's feedback. And you keep going anyway. Because every repetition you don't do feeds the old self. And every repetition you do, even imperfectly, weakens it. Let's make this real. Want to be someone who follows through? Repeat it every day. Small wins. No excuses. Want to think like a builder, not a victim? Catch the old loop. Replace it. Say the new phrase 10 times a day if needed. Want to live aligned with purpose? Repeat actions that match your values, not your emotions. Don't wait for motivation. Build repetition. Because repetition becomes motivation. You see, most people think motivation leads to action, but it's the other way around. Action leads to repetition. Repetition builds identity, and identity fuels sustainable motivation. It's not magic, it's math. And if you've been wondering why you keep feeling stuck, why the old mindset keeps returning, why nothing feels solid yet, ask yourself, what have I been repeating and what needs to be repeated instead? Write that down. Make it visible. Say it out loud. Because repetition is happening whether you choose it or not. The only question is, are you building reality or reinforcing the trap? Now it's your turn. Drop one phrase in the comments. Just one. Something you're ready to start repeating until your brain believes it. Say it every day. Write it every morning. Live it every evening. Because repetition builds reality. And now, you're finally in charge of what gets built. You keep telling yourself you just need to believe more. Believe in yourself. Believe in your goals. Believe in the new identity you're trying to build. But belief without evidence? It fades fast. You say you believe you've changed, but then you act like you haven't. You say you believe you're disciplined, but then you keep breaking your word. You say you believe the old version is gone, but then you keep feeding it attention. And you wonder why the belief doesn't stick. Why it feels like you're forcing it. Why, deep down, you still feel like a fraud. It's not because you lack belief. It's because you lack evidence. Stephen Covey said, "We are not a product of our circumstances. We are a product of our decisions." But decisions only become real when they're backed by action. Repeated action, visible action, trackable action, because that's what creates evidence. And evidence is what your brain trusts most. You can speak affirmations all day. You can visualize the new version of yourself. You can repeat every powerful sentence you've ever heard. But if your behavior doesn't match, your subconscious doesn't believe you. It sees the gap, and that gap becomes insecurity. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to convince yourself of something you haven't proven yet. So let's fix that. Let's stop chasing belief and start building evidence. That means you don't just say, "I'm disciplined." You do the thing when it's inconvenient. You show up, even when the mood is gone. You keep the promise, even when no one would blame you for quitting. Because every time you do, you send your brain a signal. This is who we are now. And the more you send that signal, the more stable your identity becomes. Not because you believe it, but because you've seen it. You felt it. You've proven it. Let's go deeper. Your brain is evidence-based. It doesn't argue with results. It doesn't resist patterns. It follows proof. So if you want to rewire who you are, stop waiting to feel like the new you. Start building a stack of undeniable actions that make the old version irrelevant. Every morning you follow your routine, that's a brick. Every time you finish the task without excuses, that's a brick. Every time you shift your focus instead of looping old thoughts, that's a brick. And brick by brick, your mind begins to believe. We don't live there anymore. We're building something different now. That's the power of internal credibility. It's when your brain no longer second guesses your words, because your actions are speaking louder. Let me be clear. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more journaling. You don't need more reminders. You need evidence. Real, tangible, consistent. Because belief without evidence is just hope. But belief with evidence becomes identity. It becomes momentum. It becomes permanent. That's why people fall back. Not because they didn't want it. Not because they weren't serious. But because they never stayed consistent long enough to believe their own transformation. And without belief, you'll always hesitate. You'll always second guess. You'll always wonder if it's real this time. But when you build evidence, you stop wondering. You start knowing. So here's your challenge. Stop focusing on how to feel different. Start focusing on how to build proof that you already are. Every action matters. Not because it's huge, but because it's recorded. Your brain is always watching, always tracking, always asking, is this who we are? And the only way to answer that question with confidence is to give it so much evidence that doubt can't survive. Let's make it simple. You don't need to believe in the big outcome. You just need to believe in your next move. Then do it. Then do it again. Then do it until the belief isn't something you repeat. It's something you reflect. You are the proof. Now tell me in the comments, what's one action, small or big, that you'll do today to give your brain undeniable evidence that you've changed? Say it. Do it. And let your actions speak louder than your thoughts ever could. You weren't broken. You weren't lazy. You weren't unworthy. You were just listening to the wrong voice over and over again. And when you hear something enough times, you don't just believe it. You become it. But now something changed. Not because the voice disappeared, but because you stopped obeying it. This entire journey hasn't been about motivation. It's been about clarity. You've seen what was happening beneath the surface. You've seen the loops, the delays, the lies your brain kept serving to keep you safe. And you've seen how those lies became your limits. But not anymore. Because now you know. Your mind is not your enemy, but it's also not your master. It's a tool, a powerful one, but only when you decide how it gets used. Every thought is a suggestion, not a sentence. Every emotion is data, not a command. Every delay is a test, not a verdict. And every time you choose to lead instead of follow, you shrink the trap. You weaken the old identity. You build something stronger than the loop. You build self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. You no longer move to prove. You move because you've decided who you are. You no longer act from fear. You act from alignment. You're no longer a prisoner of your thoughts. You're the one who chooses what becomes identity and what gets dismissed. And that's power. Not loud power. Not flashy power. But the kind of power that makes you consistent when no one's watching. The kind of power that builds quietly until nothing and no one can shake it. That's the real transformation. Not a motivational spike, but a quiet shift in who you trust. Not your past, not your doubt, but yourself. The version of you who doesn't wait for belief, but builds it through action. The version who doesn't obey loops, but breaks them. The version who doesn't keep feeding the old system, but writes a new one. And here's the truth you take with you now. You were never stuck. You were just believing the wrong voice. And now, you're finally done listening. So write this in the comments. Right now, I'm done following thoughts that don't serve me. Then write your new sentence. One that you'll repeat, live, and prove every single day. Say it out loud. Anchor it. Let it echo louder than the voice that kept you small. Because your mind is still active. It's still feeding you inputs. It always will. But now, you're in charge of what gets accepted, of what gets repeated, of what gets built. This is leadership. This is discipline. This is identity. Chosen, not inherited. And if this video anchored something in you, don't let it fade. Subscribe now, not for another motivational hit, but for reminders that this version of you is real. And it's not going away, because you're not just thinking differently, you're acting differently. And that's how the new self wins, one decision at a time. Now go watch the next video, because this shift you've just begun, it needs reinforcement. And in the next one, you'll learn how to protect your focus and never fall back into the trap again.